Good evening. I'm Casey Seiler, the editor-in-chief of the Times-Union and your master of ceremonies for the third annual Wizard's Wardrobe Readers Theater. A great evening for a great cause. Thank you all for coming out on a rainy night. We'll begin with our literary luminaries very soon, but first we're going to start by honoring the Native people and their stories with a land acknowledgement offered by Joseph Brushak.
Kwai kwai, nito ba, hello my friends. It has become tradition for us to recognize the indigenous people whose lands these were and who are still connected in body and spirit to this place. Before the 1600s, this area was known to the Mohican people as Pempotat Wikano, which means the fireplace of the Mohican nation. The Wikanitok, the river that flows both ways, which comes past here. It was also known to the Kanien'ke'ono of the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Mohawk Nation, as Skinektada, the opening among the pines. And so we acknowledge the indigenous people in this land, and we who are both indigenous and have come from many different places, I ask you to join your mind and your heart with me in caring for this place, in remembering, and more than that, considering the generations still to come. Olioni Nidombak. Thank you, my friends.
And now, please welcome our readers this evening. And as they come out, I want to take a moment to recognize some of the folks behind the organization we're here to support, including Wizard's Wardrobe founders Deborah and Eric Fagans. Where are you? As well as members of the Wizard's Wardrobe board who are here tonight. If you would please raise your hands. We're also happy to be joined tonight by my friend Paul Grandal, the director of the New York State Writers Institute. Paul, where are you? Where is he? Whose column appears Wednesdays in the Times-Union, I would remind you. As well as Tori Brown of the United Way and Paula Weiss of Children at the Well, two organizations also devoted to bringing the spirit of education and the joy of reading to children all over the Capital Region. Thank you very much for being here. So what is this organization that brings us out tonight? Wizard's Wardrobe's origins go back almost exactly 10 years to September of 2011 to a group of members and friends of Albany's First Presbyterian Church who came together to tutor children at Giffen Elementary School in the city's South End. That work eventually led to the 2017 opening of the Wizard's Wardrobe space a block from the school as a center for one-on-one tutoring for children in grades 1 through 5, supplementing the work of teachers at Giffen and other nearby elementary schools. The goal is simple and clear and backed up by the data. A child who is proficient in reading in elementary school is far more likely to succeed in the higher grades and beyond. Wizard's Wardrobe also includes a program for young authors to ensure they're encouraged to tell their own funny, sad, outlandish, and magical tales, which means that in a couple of decades, the next Dr. Seuss or J.K. Rowling could be a product of the South End. The nonprofit vision is stated as this: through literacy, each child will be poised to reach their full potential, and the Wizard's belief is that all children deserve the opportunity to succeed. Your attendance tonight helps make that success possible. And now, to begin our evening of tales, as noted, it's a rainy night. Nobody's on Facebook, so this is perfect. There is, of course, nothing better than sharing its story with a child. When you read a book to a child, odds are they're snuggled up next to you, hopefully after they have brushed their teeth. When you read a book to a child, neither of you are watching TV. When you read a book to a child, you might just find yourself moved to tears by, for example, the poetry of Margaret Wise Brown's Big Red Barn, or the scene in Nicholas Nickleby where, spoiler alert, The poor, abused, loyal best friend, Smike, breathes his last, only to wipe your eyes, blow your nose, and notice that your audience has drifted off to sleep. And yes, this happened to me, and it was some of the best reading I've ever done in my life. When you read a book to a child, you are making it far more likely that a child will someday read on their own. And so in that way, when you read a book to a child, you are opening a very large wardrobe indeed, and outfitting them with a shield against an often daunting reality. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first and featured readers, William Kennedy and his son, Brendan. The elder Kennedy. Mere mention of the name prompts applause. The elder Kennedy, as I'm sure this audience is well aware, is the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Ironweed, Roscoe, and most recently, Chango's Beads and Two-Tone Shoes. I hasten to add that he, like Paul, is a former staff reporter and an award-winning investigative reporter for the Times-Union. I should also note that Bill's play Grandview was staged by Capitol Repertory Theater, our host tonight. Brendan Kennedy is a senior counselor at Mower, the nationally recognized marketing and communications firm. Apropos to this evening, they are also that rarest combo in American letters, a father-son set of co-authors of two children's books, Charlie Malarkey and the Belly Button Machine, and Charlie Malarkey and the Singing Moose. Bill, Brendan, take it away.
Well, we're talking here about literacy in children, and I found that Brendan was very literate, probably in the womb, but that he was very lively at the age of 3.5. I'll read you something later about that. And and I kept giving him books and children's books, and then one night he was 5 years old, and it was 1975, and I went in to put him to bed or whatever, and I sort of started to tell him a story. I don't know why. I don't know what the impulse was, but I started the story, and I said something like, once upon a time there was a guy named Charlie Malarkey, and once he went to sleep, and when he woke up, there was no belly button on him. He told his mother about it. He said, "I wonder where my belly button went." And so I carried on with that for a little bit, and I'll read you what I more or less told them on that first night. And then I went back the next night and told them a continuation of the story, because I went so far and I couldn't go any further, and But I built up a little steam, and so I went back the next night. But I'll read you the first chapter, first page here, and then he can take over. Once upon a time, there was a guy named Charlie Malarkey. Well, I read that. So his mother lifted up Charlie's shirt, and what do you know? His button wasn't there, and she said, "Just lie down for a while, Charlie." And she called the doctor. So Charlie went to bed and looked at the place where his belly button used to be, and he had a dream that his button was back, but that all his toys were gone now. But then he woke up again and he found his toys were really there, but he still didn't have a belly button. Before the doctor came, Charlie's friend Iggy Gowalowitz came to Charlie's house, and Mrs. Malarkey let him in and asked, "Iggy, do you know where Charlie's belly button went?"
a little bit blind here. So Charlie and Iggy and Mrs. Malarkey looked first in the book about lost buttons and baby teeth to find out where to look for lost belly buttons. The book said, when a belly button is lost, it is usually stolen. Very few people ever lose their belly buttons accidentally. However, said the book, it's always a good idea to take a look around the house, just in case. So everybody looked in the bookcase and in the wastebasket and the garbage can and the peanut butter jar and under the porch and under Charlie's pillow, but nobody could find it. Charlie all of a sudden grew very angry and yelled out loudly, "I want my belly button." Just then, Dr. Mamaluka arrived to give Charlie a checkup.
I don't think the doctor was in my first narration, but I was far enough along in telling the story that I said, this is a pretty good story, and I could make a book out of this. And so I went over to my workplace on Crooked Lake, and I spent the whole day working on Charlie Malarkey, and I wrote probably 2 sentences, and decided that I had nothing to say. So I called Brendan into the picture, and I asked him to come up to my office in our house, and I had a partner's desk in those days, and he sat on one side and I sat on the other. There was a double desk, and that's where we began writing the story. And what I said to him, well, here they're going to call the doctor. They're going to try to figure something out about Charlie, so what happens when the doctor comes? And this is in part what Brendan contributed, which is the language. Just then, Dr. Mamaluka arrived to give Charlie a checkup. "Moop," said the doctor when he got to the place where Charlie's belly button used to be. "What do you think, doctor?" Mrs. Malarkey asked. "Moop," said the doctor, who seemed very upset by the sight of no belly button. "What do you mean, moop?" said Mrs. Malarkey, who seemed more upset by the doctor than by Charlie's condition. But all the doctor did was give Charlie some quiet medicine. Charlie asked when he took the medicine, "Will this get me my belly button back?" But the doctor only said, "Moop," again and foofed out the door.
That's Dr. Mamaluka. So I'm going to do a little paraphrasing here, but the next thing, Mrs. Malarkey goes out shopping, and the doorbell rings. And, "Moop indeed," said Mrs. Malarkey, and she went shopping for marmalade meatballs, Charlie's favorite supper. And so Iggy and Charlie were alone in the house when the doorbell rang. Charlie answered the door, and there stood a man with a face like a walnut. "Hello," said the visitor. "My name is Ben Booby, and I'm in the belly button business." "What kind of business is that?" Charlie said. "I sell belly buttons," said Ben Booby, "new and used." "Maybe you could buy one," Charlie, Iggy said. How much are they? Charlie asked the man. $500 new, said the man. $26 used. Here's my card. Tell your folks about me. If I did get one, how would you put it on me? Charlie asked. I have a machine, Ben Booby said. And he went down the steps and got into his truck with the lettering on the side that said, Ben Booby of the Button Box, 246 Abdominable Street. Then he drove away. I don't like the looks of that guy, Charlie said. I bet he knows I lost my belly button. How could he know? Maybe he stole it, Charlie said. Yes, I'll bet he's a belly button robber. So Iggy goes home, and that night he takes great care to secure his belly button by putting a jelly bean on top of it and then a Band-Aid over that. And then he wakes up in the morning after having a dream that there was something over his stomach in the middle of the night. Wakes up, takes off the Band-Aid, and there's no belly button. This is fantastic, Charlie said. That machine steals belly buttons right through adhesive tape. If we don't stop this, nobody's belly button in the world will be safe. We'll call the cops, said Iggy. No, said Charlie, we'll take care of this ourselves. I've got a plan.
Okay, so when I got so far with the story, I just couldn't go any farther. But when I got Brendan into the picture, as I said, he started, and his contribution was always very weird and much weirder than I could imagine. So he and I, for instance, let me go back for a second here. He invented a guy named Keepy Loop, who was flat, and his father stepped on him when he was a boy, but he ate dirt, and he was a very strange little boy, and
He lived under the rug.
yeah, lived under the rug, and one morning going to school, I asked, we compared notes every morning on what was going on with Keepy Loop, and I said to Brendan, "What's going on with Keepy last night, or this morning? Any news?" And he said to me, "Do you ever see any Keepies?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You don't see them around very often." But he and I would have breakfast with Keepy. What we would have would be clock juice, toast sandwich with toe jam on goat bread, telephone soup, hippopotamus cookies, fried underwear, French fried socks, broiled ears, nose juice, scrambled shoelaces, lizard sauce, and boiled armpits. So that was much of Brendan's imagination at work. So anyway, they go, Charlie and Iggy go down to the Button Box, and they see it, and they see that it's covered with buttons and golf balls and all kinds of weird things, and every button in the world looked like that was, and so they went out around the back of the building and peeked through the window and said, "Wow, look at that monster." And Charlie came over and peeked in, and they saw Ben Booby in there with his assistant Marvin Mellon, and they were standing in front of this machine. And now Marvin, Ben Booby was saying to Marvin Mellon, who had a head like a small cantaloupe. This is a dangerous machine that took me 12 years to build. But it was worth it because it's going to make me rich. And now it's full of electricity and terrible gas and oil and smelly acid and hot pepper. And if you don't handle it just right, it can go crazy and ruin all the furniture. So don't push the wrong switch when you're stealing somebody's belly button. And at that, Ben Booby pushed the steal it now switch and the machine began to work. Does this sound okay, everything? It was a long, tall, short, thin, fat machine with hairy pipes like legs and arms. It had pancake feet and an enormously long, movable nose, long enough to reach into the bedroom windows that looked like a funnel with this wide side facing out. The machine was made of broken glass and plastic with cement on one side and very serious wires going in and out of any number of places. At one end, it had two unpleasant-looking prongs sticking out of it, and in the middle was the big tank with 8 sides, and rollers and gears and bolts and wing nuts, and rivets and springs and several things that looked like lemon donuts. It was mostly black, except where it was shocking pink and grizzly green, and it had wicked-looking yellow lights that winked like evil eyes. The sound it made was like fingernails scratching on a blackboard, and a room full of giants cracking their knuckles, and 683 chickens squawking, and 683 pigs squealing. And when Ben Booby turned it on, it smelled like several kinds of cough medicine and Vicks Vapo Rub and cod liver oil and broccoli pie with smoked oysters, and Charlie and Iggy almost had to leave the backyard.
All right, so we're at quickly. So it turns out there was a monkey on the table that was about to get his belly button removed. His name was Max. There was another monkey named Harold. And then they run out of boxes for the machine, and so they have to go shopping for boxes, which is very, very upsetting to Ben Booby. He punches his friend Marvin Mellon out there because they have to go buy boxes. So, but Charlie, being the responsible citizen, feels that they shouldn't leave the poor monkey without his belly button. And also might be able to get their own belly buttons back. So they look around, and sure enough, they find their belly buttons on the shelf. And they sort of look in, you can't really see, but that's what it looks like. I think Charlie went to the shelf where a long row of boxes sat alongside a dozen jars of terrible oil and awful pepper. All the boxes were marked with names, and as he went down the road, Charlie suddenly exploded with excitement. "They're here, Iggy, our buttons, they're here." Charlie opened the round box with malarkey on it and found it full of mothballs. But in the middle of the mothballs, he spotted what looked like a mosquito bite wearing sunglasses. Here's what it looks like. Looks like a mosquito bite wearing sunglasses. "There it is," Charlie said, and he tried to pick it up, but it was slippery and slithered away among the mothballs. Iggy, looking in his box, found the same thing Charlie found, except for the shape of his button, which looked like this, which has a little squiggle in it. So they read the instructions. Fortunately, there are instructions, instruction manual.
Title of the instruction manual.
Oh, right. So Charlie looked in the middle drawer of the machine and luckily found a book of instructions on how to run what the book called Ben Booby's two-way belly button projector. The book said, "This machine projects all kinds of belly buttons known to man. It is very good at insies and also specializes in outsies. It will remove belly buttons through anything except dirt. If the target button is buried in dirt, there is no way of getting it away from its owner." I wonder why my belly button is all dented, Iggy said. "Your belly button isn't dented," Charlie said. "It's square." "Yours isn't square." "No, mine is round. That's why it's in a round box." "In this world, everybody has the same belly button." "Don't be silly," Charlie said. "Some people have belly buttons shaped like noses and knees, and others have them shaped like tennis rackets and popsicles. But this is no time to jibber-jabber about the shape of belly buttons. Are we going to put ours back, or aren't we?" So anyway, they tee up the machine, they put each other's belly buttons back on, and there was his belly button back where it ought to be, sort of. It worked, Iggy. You see? You want yours on now? Boop, Iggy said. Back to boop. So then you can get the grand finale here.
What they decide to do is, Charlie will go first, I guess.
Yeah, Charlie went first, then Iggy, and then they teed up Max.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, and they teed up Max, and just then, as they were getting ready to, Charlie said, "Hit that button, Ig," and the nozzle comes around over Max, who's it's not how it happened. Iggy pushed the give it back switch, and
That's what I just read, so
you read this.
yeah, so we're on the next page.
You didn't read Moop.
Yeah, I did.
You did? You didn't read Moop. All right, well, anyway, the guys get their belly buttons back on, and then they're getting Max. It's the only good thing to do, says Charlie. So they put the boob, and then just as they're getting Max ready on the table, in rushes Ben Booby. Iggy tripped him, and Ben Booby fell against the machine, and just Marvin Mellon comes in the door with a load of boxes for the belly buttons, and Iggy tripped him too, and the boxes flew across the room, and one hit the give it back switch just as Ben Booby leaned over the table where Max the monkey was waiting for his belly button. Ben Booby looked up as the machine plooped, and the funnel nose came down on his face. When it snapped back up again, Max the monkey's triangle belly button was installed right at the end of Ben Booby's nose. Harold the monkey opened the cage door by himself just then and jumped onto the machine, and he pushed all the buttons. The machine rumbled and rocked, shot hot pepper steam all over the walls and out the windows, played a chorus of Wabash Cannonball, and then twisted itself into the shape of a poppy seed bagel. And Ben Booby yelled out, "You dirty, stinking, rotten little kids, you ruined my machine." And Marvin Mellon, terrified by it all, ran out the door and was never seen again in either North America, Europe, or Asia. Charlie grabbed Max and Harold and ran out the door. And Harold is another monkey. And ran out the door, gave it a last and it died. And then, here, you can read these two paragraphs, and I'll read this one.
All right, so, and then the machine went silent, and never again did it make a noise. Eventually, someone decided it was a sculpture, and now it's on permanent exhibit at the Dead Machinery Museum in Albany, New York. The boys waited outside and saw Ben Booby come out, smelling like broccoli and smoked oysters. The police arrived just then and arrested Booby for disturbing the peace, both with his smell and with his nose, which was 5 times as big as anybody else's nose, and kept making noises like a Roman candle.
Okay, so then when Iggy and Charlie got home and took a good look at themselves, they found out they weren't quite the same as they used to be. Iggy's belly button was on sideways, and Charlie's was about an inch too far to the left. Well, this bothered them at first, but they learned to accept it as the price of experience. And in time, they even liked the way their belly buttons looked, which was not like anybody else's in the world. Thank you very much.
The end.
The Kennedy boys. In a recent conversation with Bill and Brendan, they noted that they completed the book before Bill gained great fame after the publication of Ironweed, and selling it was somewhat difficult. They attracted a couple of rejections from publishers who found it might be too disturbing for children. So anyone in the audience tonight who is traumatized, remember it is in a good cause. It's all just a story. So
Freudian, too.
too Freudian. And now we will hear the first of two poems tonight from Aya Osman, a Sudanese-American poet, storyteller, and student activist from Niskayuna, now in her sophomore year at Union College, where she is pursuing a double major in English and political science, as well as a minor in Africana studies. I should also mention that Aya was a charter member of the Times Union's Community Voices panel, and it has been very nice to see her on something other than a Zoom call for a change. She's here tonight representing Children at the Well, a 15-year-old organization that seeks to build community, grow leaders, and foster authentic relationships grounded in the celebration of differences by increasing the capacity for civil discourse through the sharing of stories. Aya.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. My first poem of the night is entitled Love Language. We haven't spoken in a while. I haven't really been up for it. And besides, there's no point. I don't believe you anyways. I feel nothing when we speak. But maybe there's hope for me. Maybe I should tell you everything you already know for my own sake. Maybe I'm worth saving. Maybe you are worth surrendering to. Because every time I picture my life without you, it doesn't feel like a life at all. Because every time I try to fill the void, it expands. It becomes a gaping wound, a hole in my heart, infinite space. Because you don't scare me as much as I scare myself. Because talking to you means holding a mirror to my imperfections, locking eyes with my demons, picking up the pieces of my broken shell with my bare hands and begging you to stitch my skin back together again because those shards cut deeper than shattered glass. Talking to you means counting my transgressions on my hands and running out of fingers. It means ending the conversation as soon as I realize I'm so far gone that I don't even care. Talking to you means trusting it is not all a coincidence, believing you'll hear me, making a sacrifice for someone I can't hold, something I still can't feel. Talking to you frightens me to my core because I still can't feel. Why can't I feel? Is it because there's no redemption for me or because you never existed? Why won't you make me feel? Why can't I feel a damn thing? There was a time when I spoke to you every chance I got, before I went numb, a time when you were my solace. I confided in you my deepest fears, my most intimate secrets, my greatest hopes. I told you about the parts of myself you handpicked and you listened. We talked for hours, conversed for nights at a time, every syllable dancing on the tip of my tongue, only for you to free it from its captivity. You built me heaven with your words. I experienced what can only be described as glossolalia. I burned every word you said to me into my memory. I learned your love language and it became my native tongue. But my memory has failed me. The heaven you built me with your words has crumbled. I've lost the language we shared, like a child separated from the motherland. My syllables stopped dancing years ago. I've buried the words you said to me with the version of myself you once spoke to. I am not her, a child so fascinated by the intricacies of language that she forgets to listen. Enticed by the prospect of solving sentences she confuses for riddles. I promise to listen this time. See, I never really knew you for who you are, only what they said you are. I'll give you a second chance only if you give me one. I'll relearn your love language only if you learn mine. Thank you.
And now we'll hear again from Joseph Brushak, traditional storyteller, poet, and author of more than 170 books in various genres. An enrolled member of the Nulhegan Abnaki Nation, his work often reflects his native ancestry and his lifelong interest in American Indian history and culture. He's the recipient of an NEA Poetry Fellowship and the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Native Writers Circle of the Americas. His most recent books are Res Dogs, a novel in verse, and Peacemaker, a novel based in the time of the founding of the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois League. Joseph Brushak.
Kwai, ni don bak. Hello, my friends. De Louise Sosa, Alanoki da Jose. My name is Joseph, or the Peaceful One. And this novel of mine, Res Dogs, takes place during the pandemic. My main character is a young Wabanaki woman who finds herself visiting her grandparents on their reservation and cannot return to her own mother and father in their home in Boston because of the pandemic. And that is where it begins. Her name is Malian. When Malian woke up and looked out her window, the dog was there, just as he had dreamed it would be. It was lying on the driveway halfway between their small house and the road. It wasn't sleeping. Its head was up, its ears erect, its paws in front of it, as if on guard. As Malian watched, the dog turned its head to look right at her, as if it knew her, as if it had known her for a long, long time. Balsam, she said. Kwai, ni don ba. Hello, my friend. The big dog nodded and then turned back to continue watching the road. Balsam, that was the old name for a wolf. It was a good one for that dog. It was big as a wolf. It looked like the videos of wolves she'd watched on her phone. The only things different about it were the white spots over each of its eyes. Four-eyed dog, a soft voice said from back over her shoulder. It was Grandma Frances. Malian had not heard her come up behind. She was used to that. Both her grandparents could walk so softly that she never knew they were there until they spoke. Grandma Frances would tease her about it. Be careful, granddaughter. You don't want to let no Indian sneak up on you. Grandma Frances put her hand on Malian's shoulder. Looks to me like he thinks he belongs here, she said. And then she chuckled, or maybe like he thinks he owns this place. Would that be okay? Malian said. Grandma Frances chuckled again. Seems to me it's not up to us. When a dog like that just appears and chooses you, it's not your decision. Could I go outside and see what he does? Malian said. Let's ask your grandpa. Roy, get in here. But Grandpa Roy was already there. I've been listening to every word. Seems to me if you step outside, then move real slow whilst you watch what he does, you'll be okay. But just in case, I'll be right behind you. Malian shook her head. Remember what they said? You and Grandma should not go outside. It's too dangerous. You might get that virus. That's why I can't go home to Mom and Dad. And we're gall darn lucky you're here with us, Grandpa Roy said. That old saying about how we don't know what we'd do without you Sure makes sense these days, so I'll stay inside. But you stay in too. Just open the door and we'll see what he does. Molly-Ann cracked open the door. The dog stood up and turned her way. It opened its mouth, let its tongue hang out in what she knew had to be a smile. She held out her wrist. Balsam, she called, her voice soft but sure. The big dog walked over and sniffed her hand. Balsam, she said again, dropping to one knee as she placed her hand on its broad head. The dog looked her straight in her eyes and had a sense of intelligence and even a little humor and a kind of certainty. Molly-Ann nodded, and Balsam nodded back. Yes, that can be my name. I'm here for you. Then he licked his fingers before turning around and going back, heavy muscles rippling beneath his skin, to drop down where he'd been. Guess he is guarding us for sure, Grandpa Roy said. Looks like you got a new friend. Balsam was lying on his back, his tongue hanging out as Molly-Ann rubbed his stomach. She was thinking about how cool it was. Their names sort of sounded the same, even though his meant wolf and hers was just the way her old Pennacook people who didn't use the sound of L pronounced sound of R, pronounced Marianne. Yep, Grandpa Roy said, nodding his head. No doubt, he's chosen you. He tapped his long index finger on his chin, a gesture he often made before he would tell a story. Dogs on any reservation, they have their own lives, their own tribes. When we'd travel, like in the spring, we used to go and live by the falls where the fish were running. Lots of times, those dogs would not go with us. They'd stay in the village and take care of themselves. He chuckled. You know, my grandpa, Red Hawk, told me how one time when they'd gone to the falls, he realized he'd left his best knife behind, went back to get it. He also wondered just what the dogs were doing with all the people gone like that. So he snuck up to the edge of the village. My grandpa could move real quiet, and he stayed downwind so they couldn't smell him. I guess none of those dogs knew he was there. When he peeked out from behind a tree, what he saw was the darndest thing. Those dogs were acting just like people. They'd put on clothes that we left behind. Some were walking around on their hind legs. Others were sitting around the fire drinking soup from wooden cups they dipped into a pot they had cooking. One was even smoking a pipe. Grandpa Red Hawk figured the best thing he could do was just leave those dogs be. So he didn't bother to look for his knife, just made his way back to the falls. What it showed him was that dogs could do just fine on their own without us. We humans were lucky they chose to live with us, or maybe the other way around. We were the ones who chose to live with them. The big dog had sat up when Grandpa Roy started to tell that story. As soon as he was done, he walked over, shook himself, and put one paw in Grandpa Roy's lap. Did I get it right? Balsam said. Yep, nodding. The dog nodded, a way of saying that, then went to lie back down in front of Molly-Ann.
Our next reader is Elizabeth Brundage, the author of 5 novels, including most recently The Vanishing Point, a literary thriller set against the world of photography. Her previous novel, All Things Cease to Appear, was selected as one of the best mysteries of 2016 by the Wall Street Journal and was produced as a very spooky recent Netflix release, Things Heard and Seen. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, she's taught at a number of colleges and universities and recently served as a writer-in-residence at Skidmore College.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to start with the first chapter so you can get a sense of what the beginning is. It's a novel about 3 photography students who meet at an exclusive workshop for talented students in Philadelphia, and the book advances 20 years later to when they meet again. So it's I'll just begin with the character of Julian, but I'll start with this quote from Avedon. Part 1, Portraits of Adults. A portrait is not a likeness. The moment an emotion or fact is transformed into a photograph, it is no longer a fact, but an opinion. There is no such thing as inaccuracy in a photograph. All photographs are accurate. None of them is the truth. Richard Avedon. Okay. Julian. It was on the subway that night, heading home from work, when he first discovered the news about Rye Adler. Peering over the shoulder of a fellow commuter, he saw his long-lost friend looking back at him. Under his gloomy, unsmiling portrait read the headline, "Rye Adler, photographer of the rich and infamous, is presumed dead at 52. Shaken, Julian stepped off the train at 86th Street and climbed up from the din of the underground into the late March dusk, taking the damp air into his lungs. For a moment, he stood on the sidewalk, bearing the wake of irritable strangers, then started west as a cold rain began to fall. He remembered a bar he'd gone to a few times over on Amsterdam, and he walked the few blocks without an umbrella, ducking under ledges and awnings. The place wasn't crowded, and once he'd crossed its dark threshold, entering a sanctuary of blood-red booths and muffled chatter, he doubted his ability to ever leave. He sat at the bar in his coat and ordered cheap bourbon, because that was what he'd drunk with Adler back in the day, when they were grad students in Philadelphia and in love with the same woman. Unlike his old friend, Julian hadn't made it, not like he'd hoped. His mother always consoled him that it took longer than anyone predicted, but now that he was almost 50, the prospect of any true recognition seemed doubtful. His friends all had the impression that he was doing well, better than they were even, but this perception was entirely superficial, based on his skillfully curated social media pages and the sound bites he used at cocktail parties and gallery openings. Early on, he had, like Rye, achieved a certain distinction for attending the famed Brodsky workshop, known among photography insiders as a breeding ground for the best talent. But for reasons that remain mysterious to him, things hadn't turned out like he'd planned. Out of pride, he'd convinced himself that he wasn't a failure, he was simply more suited to commercial work. And by anyone else's standards, he'd had a fine career, he'd made plenty of money. But advertising was a whole different animal, or maybe mindset was the better word. You had to narrow your focus and put the needs of others before your own, others, that vast, proverbial melting pot of humanity. Whenever he lost track of what that was, he took a field trip to Walmart and roamed the aisles. He and Rye were on opposite ends of the anthropological spectrum. Where Rye exploited his subjects in the name of high art, Julian promoted the products that kept them alive. He finished his second drink and thought of calling his wife, a habit he had yet to break. He had to assume she'd seen Adler's obituary. He pictured her wandering around in a morbid haze, crashing into things. He wouldn't forget their last night together out in Westchester, how she sat on the back steps in her mother's old coat, smoking like a teenager, and later, after he'd held her for the last time, how she cried in his arms. He knew it was mostly his fault. As his therapist liked to say, he had trouble committing to things. While he'd succeeded in staying married to the same woman for exactly 21 years, he'd never actually felt committed. Just the word made him feel wrapped in a straitjacket, and he could admit to being a shitty father, even though he still couldn't talk about it. Couldn't even say his son's name out loud without breaking a sweat. That was the truth of it. How he would ultimately resolve this in his mind, he didn't have a clue. Maybe he never would. He felt really bad about that, but to be fair, it wasn't Julian who'd asked for the divorce. Ever since the thing with his assistant, she'd stopped talking to him. Shortly thereafter, he'd been served with divorce papers at his office, and Vera, his assistant, had gone into the bathroom to cry. It was kind of a scene. Embarrassing him like that in front of the people he worked with hadn't been nice, but his wife could be ruthless when she set her mind to it. Under the circumstances, he was glad he'd insisted on keeping the apartment. This was where he belonged, here in the city, alone. He sat at the bar till closing, then walked home in the cold, pulling up his collar. The lobby of his building, with its deco floors and granite walls, seemed morbidly serene, and the lonesome elevator, as it rose to the 14th floor, was like a rattling cage. He shuffled down the corridor to his door and retrieved the paper from his mat. As he stepped inside, he encountered the screaming emptiness of his apartment. There was no longer evidence of their life together. Even their wedding photograph, which had long reigned on the surface of the credenza, was absent. After that last night, when he knew it was over with her, he could no longer bear to look at her, but bear to look at it, and threw it into the incinerator. He poured himself a drink and stood for a moment in the silent living room, staring out at the night, the city's cold geometry. The vacant streets seemed to ache with oppression gloom. He spread out the paper on the coffee table and reread the article about Adler, which listed his numerous awards and accolades, his long-standing Magnum membership, and his gift for capturing the inner lives of celebrities, quoting some of the editors he'd worked with, none of them able to comprehend how he'd met with such a fateful end. It was a tragic little story, really. As previous articles had alleged, he'd possibly taken his own life, hurling himself off a bridge somewhere upstate, but his body had not been found, and nobody was really sure if it was suicide. To anyone who knew Adler as well as Julian did, suicide was certainly not an option. They were having a memorial service on Sunday up in Hudson. He knew he had to go. He wasn't especially tired. He lay on the couch, its fabric like cold asphalt, and its architecture equally unyielding, remembering that September of '98 when they first met, back when they were still equals and nearly feral with ambition. The Brodsky workshop was competitive. It took only 12 students a year. Unlike the others, Julian's CV was pretty unremarkable. He'd gone to Rutgers, then worked a couple years at the Star Ledger, Newark's stalwart chronicle of the times, covering mostly sports and local elections, the occasional crime. He was still living at home, working out of a darkroom he'd built in his mother's basement when he decided to apply. He could vaguely recall the work he'd submitted to get in, stark black and white shots of his neighborhood out in Jersey, the unbearable stillness of the houses on the cul-de-sac, the overgrown lot behind the pathmark, where at 13 he'd gotten caught shoplifting, the window of the pizza parlor in the village, piled to the ceiling with slim white boxes. As proud as he'd been of those images, it soon became obvious that Rye's were better. When they tacked up their assignments on the wall, Adler stood out. They were street scenes mostly, people might see every day, but captured with a certain unapologetic tenderness. The woman in the pink kerchief, for example, standing on the corner smoking a cigarette, accusing you of not noticing her, just like all the other people in her life, the husband she couldn't trust, the mother who drank, indifferent teachers blind to her potential, all evident in the premature lines on her forehead, the shabby, slightly dirty white handbag clutched under her arm, the fraying collar of her coat. Adler didn't just look at someone, he looked into them without judgment, with the sort of empathy they couldn't find anywhere else. By the end of the first week, everybody knew Rye Adler had something special. Everybody wanted to be around him, to know what he knew, to see how he saw. Even then, when he was still in his 20s, people who mattered were calling him a visionary. So they end up being roommates that year. And I just want to kind of give you a sense of, I'll just read for another second, another 2 pages, to give you a sense of how the difference between how they both see these two men who are lifelong rivals and are both in love with the same woman. And this kind of carries through in their lives. And it comes to a bad end. So, a photograph is a kind of death, Sartre said. A moment taken like a prisoner, never to be again. Was the photographer, in essence, a coroner of time? They were reading the best minds on the subject, Sarkovsky and Sontag and Berger and Barth, and would gather nightly at the F-stop to drink and argue the medium's purpose and their role as photographers. Were they merely documenting the mundane evidence of life? Or was a photograph the result of some inferred context? Were they looking out a window or looking into a mirror, as Sarkovsky suggested? In those days, they were still shooting film, mostly black and white, which was easier to process than color and cheaper, and stood apart with its built-in austerity from ordinary snapshot photos. Julian was using the same SLR he'd had for years, a Canon AE1, but Adler had acquired an arsenal of used equipment, including an old R.H. Phillips 4x5 view camera that he'd lug around the neighborhood on its tripod, persuading people to let him take their picture. While everybody else was home sleeping, he'd be up all night in the darkroom, producing luminous Cibachrome prints, a janitor, a busboy, a street preacher, various panhandlers, including a blind woman, an homage to Paul Strand, grifters, hookers, working people of all variety, packing all the pathos of a Dickens novel into one startling shot. He had a painterly hankering for saturated colors, the egg yolk yellow of a waitress's polyester uniform, or the weedy brown of a mechanic's coveralls, and bestowed his subjects with a dignity they seldom experienced in real life. When Rai put up his photos, a solemn reverence would descend on the room. Julian didn't make portraits. He didn't like people in his shots. Instead, he was drawn to empty lots, condemned buildings. To him, there was a silent poetry in the sky over a vacant city park, or the rubble of a raised building, or a parking lot at dusk, the chorus of street lamps, the empty carts inert as cows in a field. His images, he felt, were pure, almost religious. Not that he was or ever had been at all religious. In fact, for all intents and purposes, he was agnostic. But uncannily, he believed there was an aspect of God in his work. He didn't know why this was. It certainly wasn't deserved. For one thing, he was the product of a mixed marriage. As a result, his parents had forsaken religion, and unlike his friends growing up, he had not been forced to endure Sunday school. When people asked about his faith, he developed his own excuses for not taking part. Mostly he felt he didn't belong. When he felt himself inside a church or temple, he felt like an outsider. He couldn't get beyond the rhetoric. He couldn't feel the presence of God. At the very minimum, God as a concept seemed pretty far-fetched. But when he took a photograph of some barren place, some sad and lonesome aftermath that reflected the indignities of man, the routine apathy displayed in the lurid destruction of a city playground, for instance, the resulting image seemed to shimmer with some unseen light, the promise of another dimension beyond what Julian could perceive with his own eyes, as if God were playing a trick on him. It wasn't anything he talked about, but it caused a certain amount of private confusion, and sometimes when he was very drunk and behaving badly, courting the very edge of civility, he would feel a yearning to repent. At his final critique, it was Rai Adler who spoke up, as if they'd all decided beforehand. In his vague, roundabout analysis, he seemed to suggest that Julian's photographs were vacuous. "Your work has no soul," was how he put it, delivered with such earnest gravity that no other student dared refute it. Not even Brodsky, who gazed at Julian with brutal indifference, as if condemning him to a life in exile. In his final collection of prints, Julian had tried to emulate at Jay's Paris the mystery of a lonesome staircase, an unpopulated alleyway, an abandoned dinner table, but no one detected the comparison. "You're an impartial observer," Rai concluded. "There's nothing at stake for you. I don't know how to feel when I look at one of your pictures." "Why do you need to feel anything?" Julian asked. Rai looked at him cautiously but did not reply. As they filed out of the room, Julian stood there with his hands in his pockets, staring at the floor, feeling like a failure. That's when Magda came up to him and put her hand on his shoulder. "Don't listen to them," she said. "It's not what's there that matters. It's about everything that's not." He clung to those words, even though nobody really cared what the women thought. Over the years, he reflected on that single afternoon, the flat gray light of the studio, the rain streaming down the windows, the faces of the other students, watching as Adler's comments took effect like a dangerous drug, disabling some essential organ, a death sentence conferred in a single impulsive moment. Thank you.
And now we have Ashley Charleston, an author and English learning arts teacher whose collaboration with artist Nyasha Capes, entitled Nyasha's Be-Beautiful Adventure, and that's B-E-E--Beautiful, was published last winter. Charleston is a graduate of UAlbany, who received her Master's of Arts in African American Literature from North Carolina A&T State University. Please welcome Ashley Charleston.
I bring you greetings from Harlem, New York. My niece, Nyasha Copes, isn't able to be here. She has high school in the morning. You know how that can be, getting up early. The name of the book is Nyasha's Beautiful Discovery by Ashley Charleston and Nyasha Copes. "Kia!" Nyasha yells as she breaks the board with a jumping sidekick. "Woo!" exclaimed Nyasha's mother as others cheer. Nyasha knows she won the gold. Please don't let there be any bugs flying around the podium. Naija thinks to herself as her heartbeat begins to quicken. As Naija reaches the podium, she sees a bee fly by. Please keep going, she says through her teeth. Did you say something? The girl next to her asks. Shaking her head, no. Naija focuses on her family in the first row and not her fear of bugs. Zzz. Once Naija approaches her family, her grandma exclaims, "Congrats, Duke," as she hugs her. "Thanks, Nano." You haven't said a word since you got in the car, Naija's mom wondered. All I can think about is how I would have cried over a bug in front of all those people today. Oh, Naija smiles for the second time today and says, Mom, I'm going to conquer my fear. Zzz. Bees help you. Don't be afraid. Smack! What's going on back there? Naija's mom asked. I was trying to swat a bug and I bopped RJ. Stop it, Duke, said her brother RJ. Sorry, RJ. Y'all okay? Her mom asked. I'm cool, Naija said as she wiped the sweat from her brow. Zzz. Naija's brother was now playing with his toys, so he was fine. Naija needed to know how bees can help her so she can stop being afraid. Mom, can we learn how bees help people? Please, please, please. Sure thing. That Saturday, Naija and her family went to an apiary to see bees make honey. We're here. You're a big girl. You got this, Naija's mom reassured. I got this, Mom, Naija said with a smile. Don't be afraid. Bees like me help trees, flowers, and other plants serve as food and shelter. Naija grabbed her brother's hand tight for the beehive tour. Come on, RJ. The bees were beautiful and all working together. Look at the bees, Naija, RJ squeals with excitement. RJ waved at the beekeeper. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Naija's heart pounded when she heard the bees buzzing. I'm a big, brave girl. I'm a big, brave girl, she repeated to herself. Breathe. My honey helps you when you're sick and it tastes good too. When she looks up, a bee was waving a gust of gold glitter, floats toward Naija. Don't move. You have a bee in your hair. A girl about Naija's age says, Oh, Naija, no, screams RJ as Naija's hands flail. Naija sat with her eyes closed. She heard a voice she knew. Mom's here. Stay still. Her mom soothes her. Mom shoos the bee out of Naija's hair. The bee flies away. Thanks, Mom, Naija says. Zzz. When she went back to school, she felt different. When she got nervous in gym, she thought about the words of the queen bee, which made her stronger. She spotted a bee and ran her sprint in record time. Her hair had power. When she got home, she told her mom about her new school record. Zzz. After all this, Naija was still a little afraid of bugs. What a pretty flower. Naija plucked a flower with a bee in it from her backyard. What's your name, little girl? It's Naija. Naija sat on her back porch. The bee landed on her hand. Naija smiled. What's your name? I'm Bianca B. Nice to meet you, Bianca. Thanks for helping me get over my fear of bugs. I'm glad I can help you. Us queens have to stick together. The two laughed. Naija, who are you talking to out there? Her mom inquired. My friend Bianca. I don't see anyone, Naija. Mom got closer and saw the bee on Naija's finger. Naija loved the bees now. She felt like they gave her power. Let's go back to get more honey, Naija shouted with her new friend still on her finger. Really, Duke? Naija winked at Bianca as she flew away. When Naija saw a bee, she was no longer afraid, but grateful for nature and friendship. Your power is on the inside. The end.
Ashley Carpenter making her debut reading before an audience. And yes, I had the title slightly wrong. It's Naija's Beautiful Discovery, correct?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Don't get the title wrong. And next up is Ted Walker, an author and prevention coordinator at New Choices Recovery Center in Schenectady. A graduate of SUNY Empire State College, Walker is the author of 3 novels, beginning with Kendra and Terrence, that focus on the lives of the eponymous couple as they navigate life, love, loss, and addiction. Walker is also the father of 6 children, which is a lot of reading to a child.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I'll be reading from the second installation of the series entitled Still Waiting for You, Love Conquers All. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies that will cease, where there are tongues that will be stilled, where there is knowledge, it'll pass away. I will be reading from the female character, Kendra's point of view. Kendra, another day. Why is being single so damn hard? Terrence really turned my world upside down. The part that is killing me is that I really loved him. Although I'm grateful that he shared his troubles with addictions with me, I don't know if I can seriously consider being with him. I can honestly say that I have never had to deal with a recovering person. This man had me thinking that there was something wrong with me. I mean, really, he chose drugs over all of this? Why is this happening to me? There was a time when I thought that God was playing some kind of twisted game with me. Admittedly, I was never super religious, but I did believe and thought that God wanted people to be happy. It seems that my name was not on that list. A year had passed since I last heard from Terrence. Sometimes he would cross my mind, especially at night. Yeah, he had me like that. He was a good man, deep, very deep down inside. Sometimes I would cry when I thought about the good times we had, and then I would laugh at the terrible ones because I could just not believe that all this happened in my perfect, okay, not so perfect world. Social media can either be a blessing or a curse. Every so often I would check his page and see what I can see. Usually this was done on the weekend when I didn't have a date or any plans. Having a couple glasses of wine fueled my memories of Terrence, and I just needed to know how the brother was doing. He looked really good. He even added a few more muscles if that were even possible. Scrolling his page didn't pay off much. He posted some very generic quotes and Bible verses. His status was not revealed, so that did pique my curiosity. The pictures were mainly of him and his children. In them, I could see that he really enjoyed being with them. That was one of his best qualities. He loves his children and makes great efforts to provide for and see them. Even though he lives several hours away, he made it his business to visit and get them. When I think about it, that was one of the main attractions. He was there for them. Unfortunately, that is not the case for many men, regardless of their color or financial status. Why am I stressing over this man? It's clear that he doesn't want me. Did he ever really want me, or was I just something to do? I know my worth, and he definitely didn't deserve the love that I was willing to give him. I hate it when I second-guess myself. This past year, since Terrence and I uncoupled, I spent a lot of time working on myself. My commitment to working out increased, and I'm so proud to say that I was accepted into graduate school. I love being a nurse, however. I want to work in medical research and someday work for the CDC. With all of my goals and achievements, there was something still missing. My love life was meager at best. Of course, I casually dated, but I never quite found the man who I could honestly see myself settling down with. There were times when I told myself that I would give up on the concept of happily ever after and just be the best woman I can be. Besides, with my workload and starting school soon, I wouldn't have the time for the complicated relationship. I know how to get what I want when I need it. Yes, I would much rather have a man in my life to take care of certain pleasures, but let's face it, a sister would do what she needs to do. I still keep in touch with Charles. He was able to get out of the State Department mess. He ended up paying some very hefty fines, and his reputation took a major hit. I actually believe that he was trying to change. He founded a not-for-profit organization called Each One Reach One. They focus on working with young urban males who have had some challenges in life. Some of the young men have had troubles with the law or became fathers before they were old enough to vote. Charles told me that the organization plans on expanding their mission. My days are very routine for the most part. I go to the gym 3 times a week at 5 a.m. then off to work. After the work, I go to the market and pick up something for dinner. My nights usually end with me having a couple of glasses of wine while listening to Jill Scott's Fool's Gold. That song seems to be the soundtrack of my life. I talk to my friend Sam from time to time. He was able to marry his partner Joey, so his life is busy being a newlywed. Sam had suggested that we double date and take a cruise. I told him that the thought of that was cliche. I mean, who hasn't taken a singles cruise after a breakup? All I know is that I'm going to settle for just anything in my next relationship. The reality is that we all have some issues. Some of us have more than others, but we all have something. I am not just in the mood for the life-changing, make me second-guess my sanity, spirit-turning drama. The whole thing with Terrence had me seriously thinking about my relationship with men in general. Oftentimes, I would ask myself if I came off too desperate, or did I really believe in the power of love? Never did I ever want to change someone into who I wanted them to be. Truthfully, as I understand them, in relationships, there are times when people change and become what they believe their partners want and need. In my life, I honestly believe that I did the most changing. It seems that the men I chose were not willing to meet my needs. Sure, for a while it was all good, then inevitably, time comes when I become more of a mommy to them than their woman and an equal partner. Depending on who I'm dating, I had stopped doing girls' night if my man at the time complained I was spending too much time away from home. At the risk of sounding pathetically romantic, all I ever wanted was to be in a mutually satisfying relationship. Was I asking for too much? This casual dating thing isn't working. I swore off dating sites. I was not in the mood for any more BS in my life. As I reconnected with my girlfriends, I tried the more traditional ways of meeting men. The after-work happy hour scene didn't offer the cream of the crop, so to speak. There was always that man who tried too hard or thought that because he bought a few rounds, I was beholden to him and I would become his next playmate. Men and alcohol don't mix. Some of these dudes actually thought that I was impressed by the car they drove. I would laugh inside because my brand new Audi A5 Coupe 2.0 T Premium was paid for in full. Oh well, they were good for a few drinks and laughs. Thanks.
And now our final reading of the evening, another poem from Aya Osman.
I call this poem 52. 55, 54, 53, 52. Growing up, I had this one recurring nightmare. It woke me many nights. So I'd lay there, I'd contemplate, I'd breathlessly repeat the number 52 over and over and over again. I didn't know why the nightmare scared me so much, why it chilled me to my core, left me with a feeling I can only describe as indescribable. See, in this nightmare, my brain transported me to a world where I had a limited amount of words, and I was running out of words. I had just 55 left for the rest of my life, and then 55 became 54, and 54 became 53, and now I had just 52 words. And I woke up. Every time, every night, I woke up at 52 words. I'd say I was about 8 at the time. 8 years old. 8-year-olds have nightmares about the monster under their bed, the one hiding in their closet, about witches, vampires, werewolves, and clowns. I don't know, fractions maybe. So why was I having this one? I asked myself that question for years, consumed myself with it, tried to rack my brain, but I just couldn't. I stopped having that nightmare 10 years ago, but forget about it. I just couldn't. So you don't know that feeling, and I'm not blaming you. I mean, I can't even put it into words, but I've dreamt of making sense of it all since the first day I lay in my bed repeating 52 over and over and over again. But I guess all it took to better understand those sleepless nights and that wretched fever dream was to live through a nightmare much worse. When I saw the life leave George Floyd's eyes for the first time in 10 years, I had that same indescribable feeling. I realized what I was so afraid of all these years, So afraid of in that nightmare silence. I was petrified by the silence, terrified by the notion that there'd come a point where I had no more words, or I'd have to utter my last ones. How do you tell them they're killing you when you have no more words? Or maybe you have just one. Mama, I'm sorry, but you're telling me that you didn't forget every other word existed when he said mama. Telling me you didn't pray your son's last words weren't mama. And how do you write a poem when you have no words? When you cease to speak? When there's a hand over your mouth? Those questions I found much easier to answer. You don't. But don't you know that songs can still be beautiful without the words? That melodies can carry souls and lift spirits where lyrics cannot? Don't you know that if you hum loud enough, the angels will hear you? But how do you write a poem when there are no words? How do you taste the blood when they cut out your tongue? See, this right here tastes like lead water, like gator bait, like the s'mores John Crawford never got to make. And how do you feel when you're numb? See, this right here feels like hell, like 8 minutes and 46 seconds. This right here feels indescribable. But how? How do you write a poem when there are no words? You can't. You simply can't.
A perfect way to end. Thanks to our readers tonight, Bill Kennedy, Brendan Kennedy, Joseph Brushak, Elizabeth Brundage, Ashley Charleston, Ted Walker, and Aya Osman. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Douglas Blancero, the Executive Director of Wizard's Wardrobe. Doug.
Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight, and thank you to the authors who tonight gave us a powerful example of the power of reading. They shared with us their genius, their talent. They showed us how they can transcend us and transport us to new worlds, meet new friends, revisit old friends. And it's that power, it's that gift that we want to share with the young children that the Wizard's Wardrobe works with. It's giving those young children the power to read that allows them to be independent in their learning, to not to be dependent on what people tell them they should know, but what they can choose to learn to read. One of my favorite quotes is Margaret Mead's, that never doubt the power of a small, thoughtful group of people, I'm sure I'm slaughtering the quote, that can change the world. And that's what we're doing tonight with the help of the authors and with the help of you, a small, thoughtful group of committed people that are saying they want to not only change the world, but change the world for those young children we're working with. Our mission is to make sure that the children we work with are reading at grade level by the end of the 3rd grade. And that means they have a better chance of finishing high school, going to college, getting better jobs, making more money, being better citizens, and just being happier people. So at the end, thank you for helping us with our mission. Thank you for being here tonight. And thank you for sharing your talent and your genius.
Thank you. At a time when children and parents are contending with so many challenges presented by the pandemic, your support for Wizard's Wardrobe and other organizations working to better our community by adding delight to the work of educating and engaging children helps make the Capital Region a better place to live, not only for our youngest generation, but for everyone who makes their homes here. Speaking as someone who is a professional as well as a personal booster of reading, I wish you all a good evening and a safe journey back to wherever your favorite reading chair can be found. Thank you.